First of all, welcome everyone to another Launch Liberty webinar with our guest today, Alexander Skouras. I'm Isidora Kolar. I am the CEO of the New Intellectuals Network, an organization which focuses on basically training and mentoring new nonprofit leaders in the pro-liberty movement to basically build sustainable organizations and to achieve long-term success. So, as I mentioned, our guest today is Alexander Skouras. He is the executive director of Economics Olympiad, where he applies his extensive background in think tank leadership and advocacy for economic education and literacy among students, and they do that on the he does it, and the Economics Olympiad does that on a global scale. And before joining this organization, Alexander led the Center for Liberal Studies, or CAFIM, which is based in Greece. During his tenure as president, CAFIM grew from a small group of volunteers into one of the most impactful think tanks in Greece. And he also served in a role as Director of External Relations at the Atlas Network, an organization which I assume most of you have heard about, where he further showcased his expertise in fostering global partnerships and advancing ideas and policies that promote sound economic policy and prosperity. So welcome, Alexander. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you, Isidora, and congratulations on the great work that the New Intellectuals Network is doing. I'm involved in the creation of a new Greek think tank, and as a vice president, I advised our executive director to sign up with your programs, which, as far as I go, it's like walk the talk as far as testimonials go. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I'd be glad to share any lessons learned with fellow think tankers. And I don't know, depending on how this goes, traditionally we can engage in conversation. There's not like um, anything that I won't be answering today if asked. So yeah, I'm very happy you invited me to this.
We're very happy to have you, and I'm not going to ask you any sensitive questions, so you don't.
I'll answer anything.
Awesome, good to know. But also, thank you for recommending your executive director. She's been doing some amazing work, and it's a pleasure, working with her. Also, kind of learning from her. It's kind of a two-way street, so it's been great success so far. So the first thing I want to ask you, and this is something that I ask all of my guests, because I think many of us have very interesting stories to tell. So how did you first come to join the Liberty Movement? And more specifically, like what kind of kept you in the movement and what made you want to build a career in it?
All right. Well, it's an interesting story for me, at least, because it shaped my life. So um, in 2007, when the crisis was starting, I was working at a human resources consultancy. Many of my clients were logistics companies. And as soon as the crisis struck, especially in 2008, the first people who noticed were logistics companies, because they were the ones who were procuring and moving everything around. So they actually knew what was going on. And unfortunately, as many of you might know, Greece was, let's say, had a second crisis, which was not directly related with the global economic crisis, but a consequence of bad policy, of bad fiscal policy, essentially, that started in 2009 and lasted up until 2019. It was a decade-long crisis. So in 2008, two things happened. The first thing was since I was working for a company that hired people, I saw how difficult that was in Greece, what kept my competitors, what some advantages that competitors to, let's say, a temp agency um, would have if they are in the informal market. So they're not paying social insurance or anything like that. And they had huge advantages. And the government was not doing its job. It wasn't um, doing what it was supposed to. Um, and then when the crisis started, and I realized the effect of fiscal policy and how bad it was in Greece, um, I became even more motivated to start talking with some of my friends. One of them is a university professor now. The other one is a journalist, and the other one is the deputy finance minister of Greece. And we met weekly and we started talking about policy alternatives to what had happened. So I would say, I think the government should do this and get out of that. And so they were all LSE graduates. I wasn't. I studied marketing and business. So they were telling me, "Oh, Milton Friedman says that, or Hayek says that, or you know." Um, so they were bringing up all these well-known economists that I'd never heard of, and I was like, "All right, this sounds very interesting. Let me see what these guys who are copying me, or so who are copying my ideas, actually said." So I started reading and learning, especially Friedman and Hayek. And then with another friend of mine from school, we were very much into US politics. And in 2007, there was a very important moment that probably touches on my American side. And that was the North Carolina Republican primary debate. That was the primary debate where Ron Paul talked about blowback and um, the implication of the non-aggression principle in foreign policy, essentially, that the US should have a different role. Not that sure that I still subscribe to that view, but it definitely formed me for many, many years. Like, I wanted to find out more about this Ron Paul guy and who's this crazy old man um, talking about liberty and a different perspective, like not if America would not be the global policeman. And you know, in the Balkans, um, the trauma from the war on Serbia was still very alive in the conscience, especially of Greek people. So that message really resonated with me at that time. So um, that's how it all started. Then um, I brought some of my concerns to my mother, and she ended up being a closeted objectivist. May she rest in peace. Um, and she had been a closeted objectivist for 28 years, as long as I was alive. But once I initiated the conversation about human freedom and all that, she unlocked a whole new avenue for me to explore. And what happened then was I became so passionate within a couple of years. I became so much passionate about human freedom that I had decided that I'm going to change career paths and work in political communications and political campaigns. In 2009, I enrolled at the George Washington University online to study political management, which was essentially campaign management, uh, the track that I was following anyway. And in 2011, I moved to the US to complete my degree with a written goal to work for um, a presidential campaign of a libertarian leaning Republican in 2016 at an executive level. That was my 5-year goal when I moved to the US in 2011. I ended up succeeding in that goal within 6 months since I moved to the US because after a couple of internships, I ended up at the Ron Paul campaign. I met my hero and shook hands with them and all that. My then hero. And I started working in campaigns. I did a couple of them. I did one. So after I became executive director for Washington State, I moved back to Greece for a few months, ran the campaign of my friend who is now deputy finance minister, went back to the US, did a couple more. And then I went back to school, although I never finished it, for my master's degree. And I went to a Students for Liberty event, and it was Tom Palmer presenting Morality of Capitalism. And that's when everything's changed for me forever. Like meeting Tom Palmer was the most important milestone, because after that, by meeting Tom, a whole process of this rediscovery of what I thought was necessary, and I thought it was like, for good policies to prevail, I thought it was just a matter of electing good people. But through Tom and my deep connection with him, I realized that ideas matter more, and the best people, as Friedman would put it, like, it's not a matter of having the wrong people doing wrong things. It's creating incentives for even the wrong people to do the right things, right? And that's when I found out about Atlas and Anthony Fisher and the climate of ideas and these concepts that were foreign to me. And within a few months, they offered me a job. I was doing other things back then. This is in 2012, 2013. And in 2013, I started working full-time at Atlas. From that year, I knew that my career, I wanted to dedicate my career to changing the minds of people and winning their hearts, but not by asking them to vote for something in particular, but by doing this intellectual journey that so many of us are engaged.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say, lucky that your first campaign wasn't the 2016 elections in the US. That would have probably been crazy.
Yeah.
And also, you mentioned your mom. I knew that story, that she was an objectivist, but I didn't know if she was the one who kind of introduced you to the ideas. It's so interesting that she was a closeted objectivist.
Yeah.
I think many are, unfortunately.
Well, I guess it wasn't out of fear. It was out of deep respect for my individual choices. So as soon as I expressed an interest in those things, she unlocked and gave me her perspective and all that. I don't know. Was it the right thing to do? I don't know how I'm going to deal with it when my kids, I have two of them, when they start asking me about what is freedom, and, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do about that. I know for sure that in my house there's images and um, fridge magnets of Friedman and Hayek and everyone. So, you know, they've been exposed to a certain level.
Yeah, so
That's how I
maybe,
got into the movement. Um, that's what kept me. So, yeah, that's in brief my story
yeah,
on how it all unraveled.
maybe let's do another webinar in about 10 years to see how you handle the whole parenting thing as a libertarian.
Yeah.
You figured it out. I
Yeah,
think it's gonna be also a valuable lesson to all of us in the movement.
hopefully. Or a precautionary tale.
Yeah. Okay, so you have worked for a long time at Kefim. I mean, Kefim has kind of been high profile since I learned about it, and I think that's been your success primarily. And as I already mentioned, it used to be a small volunteer organization before you took over. So how did you manage to scale it to what it is today?
Yeah, well, that um, that's a great question, and um, we learned a lot of things during that period. So in 2016, while I was at Atlas, actually, no, tell me a little bit about the audience, the people here. Are they starting organizations? Are they in the early stages of the, all right.
Yeah.
So I'll start with a story that goes back in 2015. Greek government is radical left and populist right coalition. And Atlas and Cato Institute um, they asked me to organize an emergency economic summit for Greece because the country was going to hell. So we did that, and we had two goals. Number one, good policies to come out of it, and get tons of media, and all the typical metrics of an expensive conference. It was about like it cost us about 100K to do that back in 2015, including airfare and all the expenses. So not really very expensive, but for Greece it was on the upper scale. And The other thing was that there were a couple of organizations. KEFIM was one of them, and another one that no longer exists, that were Atlas members. So, and I was actively helping them to come up with business plans, training their staff, and doing a little bit of work you're doing. It was like my side hustle at Atlas, doing Greek stuff, let's say. So we said we're going to bring in some of the top reformers from around the world, and there's going to be a Nobel laureate. Thomas Sargent was here in Athens. We're going to have tons of media. All the mainstream media are going to cover it. This is your chance to start transitioning your organization from fully volunteer to professional. Like you would never have the resources to do something like that. But as far as Atlas and Cato are concerned, you can take all the credit. So if you have the credit, you can use it as infrastructure, essentially. So that didn't happen in 2015. And I had a very, let's say, unpleasant conversation with the amazing guys who were running KEFIM up until then. I told them, you have reached the point where as a volunteer organization, you've peaked. You can't go above this. It's all downward from here. So if there isn't anyone willing to take the risk to put in professional work and call it his main job, I can no longer commit Atlas Network funds to which Atlas doesn't give a lot of funds, but that was all KEFIM had, the money, the grants that we allocated from Atlas, like 5,000, 3,000, or something like that. But I said to the group, if you find someone who's going to be willing to be in charge, I'm going to support it, and we'll make sure it works. And Nikos, the executive director then, and now the general manager of KEFIM, said, I'll do it as long as you join the board, right? And you actively help me. So for a year in 2016, 2017, early 17, I was doing both. I raised the first money. I wrote the first business plans, started going around trying to find funding, and the organization relaunched. Then I brought Nikos to DC to do strategic training in a program that Atlas had back then called the Smith Fellowship, which was a program that I created for Atlas with Christina Crane. And while we were there, I had this idea of a project because, as I said, the Greek crisis lasted for a whole decade, right? So during that time, all the free market people, the only thing they were doing, because they didn't have an institution to do actual research, they were saying, oh, you shouldn't increase taxes, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. Their whole narrative was very negative. and they never had any concrete proposals that would have even a hint of budget estimate, impact assessment, anything like that. So I envisioned a program that I then pitched to one of like he passed away unfortunately in 2019 to Don Smith, who was a big donor to Atlas and a great benefactor of liberty around the world. What an amazing guy he was. So I pitched him that, and I said, you know what? If I find funding for this, I'll even move back to Greece and make sure it happens. And after a long, after a pitch that he invited me to give, he gave us the grant, and suddenly I was moving back to Greece. So we had the seed funding. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come back to Greece, and probably Kevin would have stayed at, let's say, a budget below 100,000 euro, which doesn't allow you to do a lot of things. That's when everything changed. For the record, like out of that project, we ended up doing 330 public policy proposals, out of which in 2023, 50% of them, 52% of them were either fully or partially legislated during the first term of the government that was elected in 2019 of the current center-right government. So it was a very successful project. But other than that, as soon as I came back, the whole notion, the whole idea is we tried to find people and institutions that understood what we're about and that they had interest to support us for many, many different reasons. So the difficult part was for us to come up with what we were about. What was the thing that Kefim would do that would make it worthwhile, even a meeting, not donations or anything. So having those big questions answered from the very beginning of my involvement and having the certainty of a strategy like was key to Kefim's success. Plus, of course, the initial money that we got from Don Smith, which we got because we had a very solid plan on what to do with it.
Yeah, so my experience so far with, not just new nonprofits, but honestly, a lot of them that are stagnating is that they don't spend time on developing their strategy, long-term goals, kind of figuring out like what are these grand major things that we want to achieve, not just, having the vision that's sometime in the very, very distant future, but having realistic long-term goals. And this was one of my motivations to actually do this, because I mean, I was one of those leaders. There are so many kind of strategic frameworks out there. It can be very confusing, especially for people who, don't have experience in the for-profit sphere and just come into this with great ideas but no managerial experience. So it's impressive how you manage to transform a small, great organization, especially when something is volunteer based. It can be hard to transform into a fully professional organization.
Yeah, it's about professionalism, Isidora, on the one hand. So people, we work in the nonprofit sector. We'll never get the money of the private sector. We deal with people who want to work because they're mission driven. They're willing to go the extra mile and not get paid for it, because that's what usually happens in the nonprofit sector. But on the other hand, this sounds nice if you're at the top of an organization or a boss or whatever, but it's also a big responsibility, because if you're not doing your job well, you're wasting that precious energy to the wrong directions. And if you want, like, one of the keys to it, if I can put it in the simplest way, we had a well thought strategy on who we wanted to be for Greece, like what our role was going to be. Um, we did some very critical and well thought judgment calls and guesstimates when it came to who's going to win the election, what the political climate is going to look like during that time. Um, um, how would the media perceive us? Uh, how would radical libertarians in Greece would perceive us? And they didn't like us at all because we were consciously mainstream and incrementalist in our approach, without meaning that we were less pro-liberty or anything like that. But we just thought that the country needed an incrementalist approach. But the most important thing, and this is especially because I know that you and maybe other from the I can tell from the names that we have that we're dealing and the time we're dealing mostly with European people here, um, or non-Anglo-Saxon, let's say. Um, where and why do I make this distinction? Anglo-Saxon countries like the UK, US, Australia, they have very well developed civil society systems and all that. In Europe, in Middle East, in Africa, we don't have that to that extent. And that means that if you don't have a very good strategy, it's so hard to say no to great ideas that someone else should be doing, right? And that was like one of the hardest things to do. And we did it like because we had a very well written plan. Um, Even ideas that me as a president, so to give you a little bit of a clue of how it worked at Kefim, the deal I made with every employee was everything you do, you should be able to justify from our mission. If you are asked to do something that it's not clear to you how it relates to our mission, you have the right to demand an explanation from anyone. And if you're not happy, you have an obligation to take this to the board. That's the rule that everyone who was hired at Kefim knew. And even if I tell you to do something and you think it's against our mission, it's your obligation to freedom and the organization to call me out on it. And they did. Like, I'll give you an example because I think that real examples matter in meetings like this. I had the idea to engage with the next generation of politicians to bring them closer to us by offering similar to Leadership Institute political campaign trainings. I could do it. We had a colleague, George, who was excellent at it. Like it would have been top notch. And it would help our mission very much. Probably we could raise a little money for it too. It wasn't on our mission. We didn't do it. I wanted to do it. They said, Alexander, it's not on our mission. We can't do it. Right? And we take a like, if you want to talk in American constitutionalist terms, we're very originalists about our mission. Right? It's not a living document.
I actually love that because usually there's the expectation that the top management will be the ones kind of guarding against the projects that aren't necessarily a good fit, but having the whole team uh, commit to that, I think that's a great idea, and it's something that maybe other people on this call can use in their organizations.
Yeah, I mean, and this is for people who are in cultures that do not shy away from conflict because this will does create conflict. For me, I thrive in conflict and I didn't mind. But what it does, like as I said before, as a think tank president, I'm going to benefit from mission-driven people. How can I exclude them from the mission part? And benefit, like use only the driven part. No, they're not driven, they're mission driven, right? So giving them a sense of ownership in the mission can yield a lot of great and bad things at the same time for things that you can improve. But even the interns, like the rule where you can demand explanation from your manager if you don't understand how this connects to our mission, even the interns had that right at Kefim. Like they were encouraged to.
I absolutely love that approach. I'm gonna try to actually implement. I mean, we do try, and it's kind of explicit that everyone should be involved when it comes to the mission, vision, and driving them. But if you have that actually as a system, um, I think that can be super useful to every
Yeah,
organization.
and nobody was ever punished or treated differently because they called out something mission related. It was like, this is hard to do, but you have to prove, you have to earn the trust of the team if you're the leader. And I think in Kefim it worked. Sometimes they would bring things that they would be wrong, right? But even the conversation we had where I would explain to them and in the end convince them that it was the right thing to do was enriching for everybody.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to move on to what you're doing right now with the Economics Olympiad. Um, I actually learned about this organization and its flagship project from you when you were kind of taking over as the executive director. And it was so interesting to me because it was so similar in kind of the way it's done to the Jungle School, which I've kind of worked on for many years. And we haven't met many other organizations that implemented the similar principle with collaborating with other nonprofits and kind of franchising the project. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Especially like I read that you guys scaled that project from 4,000 to almost 100,000 participants now. And that's not like, social media engagement like
No,
reach.
no, this is actual tests.
It's actually people doing actual tests, participating in the actual program. It's absolutely amazing. So can you tell me a little bit about that and what do you think is the key to this kind of success in
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm very excited to talk about this. And if you don't mind, I'll try to connect it with my life story because the reason I'm there it's directly related with my evolution as a thinker and as a professional. So in 2019, so you remember the story of it started with politics, moved on to think tanks, and focused on the climate of ideas, right? So mentally, I was at that stage. And when I came back to Greece, I had some of the smartest people, university professors, and all of them try to find out how on earth was the radical left and the populist right governing together. How did Greece ended up with Nazis, real Nazis in parliament, not neo-Nazis, like hardcore nationalist socialists. Um, and when we looked at the way they made that happen, there was a common thread, very strong, very evident from the outside. And that was that their political rhetoric and their populist rhetoric converged on economic illiteracy. So populists tend to weaponize. They identify economic illiteracy and they weaponize it. And I remembered that in 2016, in 2017, our friends from Slovakia, from Ines, had applied for a grant to Atlas while I was still there, asking money for the Economics Olympiad that they were going to do for the first time. And I thought back then, wow, that's a great project. Like, and then in 2019, we made our first um, decision as president of KEFIM to discuss with INES, the Institute for Economic Education in the Czech Republic, which is founded by our president, Martina Bacik. And I thought that the field of teaching people economics, not free market economics, let me clarify, just economics, um, would be like there was this saying that I always evolved around my mind, like the world would be a better place if everybody understood supply and demand, right? That's like I've used the supply and demand as a gateway to free market economics so many times. Like you can explain so many things by to someone who understands supply and demand. You can talk to them about human freedom so easily once they understand opportunity cost, supply and demand, those basic fundamental economics. Then during COVID, um, we lost some major donations from the US. And as president of KEFIM, I was like, all right, what do we do? We were in a very precarious situation. I remember it was summer of 2020. There was a real risk for KEFIM to run out of money. So what I did was I thought, all right, no more excuses. Money is not coming from abroad, which hint for any think tank entrepreneurs, do not depend on foreign money. If you're a national think tank, like New Intellectuals Network is a global thing, it can get money from anywhere. But if you're a Serbian think tank or an Egyptian think tank, most of your money should be coming from within your country. Because it has so many implications. I can talk about it later if you want. But I used COVID and the precarious situations we were in. I was like, all right, Greeks don't like charitable giving. They don't get any tax exemptions or whatever. They understand transactions and transactional things. So I need a project that could bring sponsorships, corporate. And it would also allow all those people who say they want to support KEFIM, but they don't want to be branded ideologically or politically. I needed a vanilla project that would allow them to help us out without being stigmatized. And while I was doing that thinking, the first thing that came to my mind was the Economics Olympiad. So during an online meeting, during lockdowns that we had, I announced to everybody, hey guys, this is what we're doing. Hope you're all ready because it's a big project and we're gonna have to work like crazy to make it happen. But yeah, so I became a salesman again. I took my briefcase, filled it up with all the brochures, used all my networks, called people, multiple efforts to book a meeting with some important people. And within a very short amount of time, uh, I was raising more money than I had lost for this project. So, but that wasn't the reason. The reason I moved from KEFIM to the Economics Olympiad and why I'm so passionate about this right now is because not only through experience, but through empirical evidence, we know that basic economic literacy makes people more likely to be pro-freedom. It sounds intuitive. I thought when I started this journey, my intuition was enough that I was doing the right thing. Then I found the empirical evidence as well. It actually shows like economic literacy in the UK. There's a great study that says that the higher the level of economic or financial literacy that someone has, the less likely they are to support income redistribution and populist candidates on both right and left. And I was like, if we're really into the game of winning the battle of ideas, and we're missing out the formative years of high schools, we need to do something about it. I need to do something about it. And that's when I expressed to Martina my deep admiration for what she had started and my willingness to be a part of it. And from there, it was just a matter of time till everything happened. So the Economics Olympiad, for those who don't know, is the world's largest and fastest growing economics competition for high school students. This year, we expect we're going to be in about 35 countries. With last year, we were in 24 and we had 97,000 participants. The structure of the competition is 4 rounds: the school round, the regional, the national, and the international. Our model is based on essentially we're doing a licensing model. We have national organizers who take our brand and our rules and our database of questions, and they adapt them into their national realities. They represent the Economics Olympiad in their country, and they have an exclusive license to run the competition. And we prefer free market think tanks, but we're not limited to them. I prefer free market think tanks and Martina because she came up with a project during an SFL retreat. So we're both pro-liberty people, but even though the project is not ideological, the theory of change behind it is. So we prefer free market think tanks because if our partners take it seriously, they have huge fundraising potential to do other stuff. So we want them to use this project as a platform in order to do more great things for freedom in their country, right? So the organization, like when I joined, we had there were fewer countries. We've grown drastically, especially since I joined. We've grown a lot in our numbers of students participating in the platform and our competition. I joined full-time in January, but part-time about 6 months before that, so last summer. And it's been a hell of a ride because this year only we're launching in the US, which is going to be a game changer, hopefully, in terms of the resources that we will have available. We're getting into Spain, Netherlands, UK, Ireland. All the Western European countries are joining. We're still trying to find someone to work with in Serbia. We'd love to have someone to work with.
Yeah, I was just talking about that today with some of my colleagues from here. Hopefully, we manage to find someone. But
And
on that note, can you tell me if there's any other criteria for the partners to join this project? And also, what's kind of the way for them to contact you about the project?
yeah, well, they can. I'm gonna write down my email here on the chat, and that would be the best way. Um, so the criteria, what we're trying to find is we try to avoid organizations that are branded as radical or extreme in their. So I would assume that since this is a new intellectuals network meeting, people would know what the Overton window is more or less, or have an idea. So it's not that there's something wrong with being on the radical side of things. It's a great strategy. But on the other hand, if you choose that, most people will watch you away from their students in their schools, right? It's a give and take that you have to suffer. So we tend to work with organizations that work within the window, right? And they're not pushing the window outwards. And with organizations that in their countries, parents would feel comfortable if their students would participate in a competition done by them. Which is kind of like KEFM was borderline on that. Like when I applied to have KEFM join the Economics Olympiad, I made strict promises that we would not be promoting KEFM anywhere, just the brand of the Economics Olympiad. And that's why it became very successful. And we literally promised that even after the first round, which the Economics Olympiad controls the questions, the regional and the national one are done with the responsibility of our local partners. We have, as KEFM, I promised that we would not be doing ideological free market economics boot camps, let's say, with the students, because it's a big responsibility when you're talking to to high school students. Like they're not adults; they can't make up their own. They're not. It's a very sensitive issue. So we stay away from any controversial stuff, because we also found out that the benefits of economic literacy come whether you're taught Austrian business cycle theory or standard ManQ, let's say, business cycles. Like the benefit is the same. It doesn't change because it's they're being taught the economic way of thinking, right? And that's the most important thing. So this project has growth potential, fundraising potential for local partners. It's indirectly a pro-liberty project because of its theory of change. And every year we gather the top students to a venue, like at a different country. Up until this year, it was a different country. For this year and last year, we'll be doing it at Ancient Olympia in Greece, because we signed an MOU with the International Olympic Academy, which was a very big success for us. And we have this amazing campus that the International Olympic Academy is offering. Truly incredible. And we had 90 students come over to Ancient Olympia last year from 18 countries, because 6 of them weren't able to make the trip. And they all said that they would come again next year if it was held there. It was so beautiful. I don't know if you like, I can share pictures later if you want, but yeah, it was quite an experience. And it's very rewarding because from a movement perspective, guess what? The future Nobel laureates or central bank governors or great university professors or great think tank researchers, a big portion of them will be Economics Olympiad graduates. Because what I've realized is that in most countries where participation in the Olympiad is not mandatory, like nowhere, there isn't a place where it's mandatory, but in many places, teachers kind of push the kids to do that, right? But the students the Economics Olympiad attracts are those who are interested in the field of economics, number one. Number two, it's those who are very driven and want to add an extra layer of competition on top of their studying into their lives, right? So we get the creme de la creme of students participating, and they all come. We meet them in person once a year from around the world, which is truly amazing.
It's an absolutely incredible project, and I mean, it's crazy to me that, I mean, at least in my country, in Serbia, high school students don't have like basic economic education in high schools. So projects like this one are, where students are gonna kind of for the first time be introduced to some of the basic economic concepts. And I think that the kind of gamification of it is a great way to go about it. I know I was one of the students that like to compete like in biology and other subjects that we had in school, and it was really motivating for me to like get to the advanced level. So I mean this I think is a ingenious way to actually get students from around the world, and especially high school students who I think we focus less on in the movement than we should, because by the time they get to universities, it gets already more difficult to kind of set them
Mhm.
straight.
Yeah, and more people compete for their time,
Yeah.
university, including the joy of life, which is hard to beat. Um, I don't know. I read an interesting question from Gore,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So I think we can stop here and move on to the audience questions. We've definitely gone over time, but I just enjoyed this
Oh, we
conversation.
have?
It
Wow.
doesn't matter. We're not sticklers for time. So let's go with Gore's question and see if anyone else has anything else to ask. Okay, so Gore asked, okay, he has given a little bit of intro here. I don't know if you had time to read this, but the question itself, if not a nonprofit civil society sector, then in what field are you preparing yourself for self-realization?
Yeah, well, when it comes I'll try to distinguish it from the self-realization part and the other sectors, right? Because when it comes to questions of self-realization, when that comes, it tells you where to go. And in my life so far, I follow it without questioning it. Once I come to a conclusion, like, you know, first I realized I'm a mission-driven person, left a Fortune 500 company and a career there to pursue an internship in politics. Then, once I realized that the climate of ideas is more important than politicians, I joined Atlas Network, went to uh, got promoted multiple times in a very short amount of time. I gave it my all. That's what I'm trying to say. And helped train hundreds of intellectual entrepreneurs. I've helped start about 30 think tanks from Malawi to Bulgaria and everything in between. Um, and then I realized, the climate of ideas, we need to go deeper and we need to find our niche over there. And that's high school students in economics and the combination of both. So that's where I'm at now. So I'll leave, if I have an aha moment like the previous ones, and I decide, I figure out that there's something else which is needed, I'm going to follow it. I don't know what it is because that's where I'm currently at. But professionally, I know what I would be doing with the skill set that I have because I've been doing this too long. And, running a think tank kind of doesn't easily translate into corporate job experience, let's say, right? So in my case, I know that I would be doing strategic and communications consulting and public affairs. Like I'd be like lobbyist or something like that. Um, I already, when I have time and I have mission aligned clients, I'll take them. Um, I'll give you a recent example. Like last week, I did a public speaking training to Airbnb's public affairs South Europe team, right? Um, but I chose them because they're Airbnb, they're for property rights, they're being targeted for with bad regulation everywhere, and I want them to be able to fight back. So, you know, as long as they're mission aligned. If I would have to struggle to feed my family, I'd take the mission alignment out and I would work as a lobbyist or um, a public affairs specialist. But
I,
that's honestly what I think.
I do hope that we don't ever lose you from the movement. So hopefully it doesn't come to that.
I don't think I don't think I'm going anywhere. Because even if I was gonna move into the back to the private sector, just so you know, one great thing that Tom Palmer made me do was to promise that no matter what I'm doing, I'll be spending some of my time or some of my money promoting freedom. So that's what I like to do with like that was the promise I made KEFM interns to take
Mm.
um, when they left.
That's a lifelong pledge, right?
Yeah, it's a lifelong pledge. So for me, I gave it to my mentor. Don't worry about that.
Awesome.
I hope I answered your question. I don't know if you were looking at
Yeah, Gorsa's got your point. Okay, so let's just take quickly one more question. So from Estella, do you have any advice on how to build a positive organizational culture in new organizations that enables them to thrive and ensures it stays that way? And basically the same, but with the organization that already exists and doesn't have a developed organizational culture.
yeah, well, that's that's a great academic field of study. Um, so the only thing that I've realized from my experience and in a way that I can answer because I'm sure that in your programs, Isidora, you spend time working on that. For me, what I've found is that in our industry, we have to be very much aware of what it means in your culture to be a nonprofit. And you have to manage the expectations of the people who work with you or for you when it comes to the money they'll be making and um, their career paths. So, and I'll be very honest, at KEFIM, the culture thing, I failed at it at a great extent. Um, I could have done so much better with the experience, but now I have the experience. So in the Economics Olympiad, let me give you a few examples of the culture. The first thing we did was we decided that we will only be hiring Economics Olympiad graduates because we said that we have the brightest young people graduating from all these countries. They're truly impressive. They're looking for jobs. Most of them come from poorer countries that, they're struggling and all that. They all want to work, and we're part of their success story that and probably help them get into university or whatever. So why don't we walk the talk and hire only our graduates? And we've started doing that with great success. The day we hire them, I tell them, if you're still working here in 4 years, you've done something very wrong. So we designed our the positions and everything for high turnover, brilliant people doing it. And these are trade-offs that each of us has to make. If you design, like, I'll give you an example. Alona, that is now part of your program, the way I had designed her position was that she would take off of my plate of responsibilities the things that I didn't want to do or didn't have time to do with a crappy salary. And in the end, she burned out. I like the role burned her out. Duh. Of course it did. For me, as long as she was working and was willing to do what was asked, like this is great. I'm a guru of management, and I didn't know it, right? So there are real trade-offs that you have to take care. And for me, it's designing. Be very realistic on your expected turnover, which roles you're going to invest in people. That's a very big decision. because personal investment of your time is very expensive to your organizations. I'm not saying don't invest in positions that have turnover, because there are organizations like the New Intellectuals Network that they're building the infrastructure for a broader movement. So, they might leave your organization, they're going to go to another one. They'll keep helping the movement, doing great things. So Isidora is willing to invest her time to our staff. But it's not always a wise idea for you to do the same thing, or to the extent that Isidora would do it, or someone who's a professional in it. Anyway, so for me, there's no golden rule for culture, but the one thing that we can do as entrepreneurs and leaders in the field is to be very honest with, because it's hard to admit that people shouldn't be working for you in 3 years if they're really good. You want to figure out a way to keep them. Well, you won't. So, yeah, those were my 2 cents on that. And I think we had one.
We have one more question, but if we can like do it in
I can do it.
sure. Let's do it in a couple of minutes and then we can end there. Okay, so how can one establish effective partnerships as well as securing grants? I mean, this is a very, very broad question, but if you can give like one top advice for these two areas, basically.
I'll start with securing grants. If I can say only one thing about securing grants, is you have to ask for them. If you don't ask for grants or money in general, you won't get it. So then it becomes a question, whom you're going to ask, how much, and for what. And it's a numbers game. You can ask, like, you say you're from Cameroon, right? With the question that I'm trying to answer now. The question, isn't it coming from Cameroon? No?
No,
Obi?
I don't see that. No, it's Uda Kwashe.
Oh, okay. Anyway, even, let me put it this way. Nigerian princes, if they email enough people and they ask for money, in the end, they get it. Everyone who asks for money, if it's a numbers game. Now, we are not like scammers or anything like that. To the contrary, we are the ones who want to protect human freedom, the most valuable thing after life. Maybe in some cases, like in my country's history, it's been said that life is not worth living without freedom. So maybe the most important thing. So all you have to do is figure out whom to ask, for how much, and for what. And if you answer those 3 things correctly, eventually you're going to get your money. Guaranteed. There's not a lack of money in the world for pro-liberty stuff. Promise. And what was the other part of the question?
It was related to effective partnerships. How do you establish it?
Effective partnerships. This is like effective partnerships. You have to be very clear and honest with whom you want to partner and for what reason. And then you need to have great contracts behind it. Like, I'm trying to answer it very quickly, Isidora. So it's both having the right mindset to partner with someone for the right reasons and knowing that, and great contracts behind it, because many things will go wrong in a partnership. And if you don't foresee them and don't have a contractual way to resolve conflicts, it can create chaos. So when you partner with people, pay attention to the contracts. Even in many countries, you might think they're unenforceable or whatever. I've found that even though one could say that for many of the countries that we work in, they also have an educational purpose. And they lay out exactly what you expect from others. So,
Yeah, this is super important. I didn't expect this to be like on the top of your list, but it's extremely important. Like setting
Yeah.
expectations through contracts, even if you're not gonna sue your partner potentially, is extremely important, and always do that when you can.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I try to go for the not obvious stuff, with a
No,
limited amount of time. But yeah, like for us, contracts are very important, and we put a lot of effort to writing good contracts that educate our national organizers on what they have to do and what they need to expect from us.
okay. Well, Alexander, this was super interesting. I mean, I've enjoyed it. I learned a lot of myself, and so I hope that the audience also enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time. I'll hope that we'll host you again sometime soon, because I think we have still a lot more to kind of discuss and